Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tailoring with Tab. My name is Tab, and this panel is about tailoring. Oh, it's in the name. So this is a panel about people who know how to sew, like a little bit. Unfortunately, it's not really a beginner's sewing panel, but there might be some tips that do help you along. It's more for people who know a little bit about the sewing, but just want to make it that much better, to get it to more like a professional quality. You know, when you pick up a jacket that's sort of pre-made and you're just like, the bottom of this is so crisp and beautiful, how do I do that? And that is what this panel is about. I'll tell you a brief bit about myself. I've been cosplaying since I was about 17. I'm now 27, so it's 10 years or so. In my time, I've made a lot of very bad costumes with awful bunch seams that haven't been ironed and bad fabrics. So the way I have learnt to sew is not through any formal qualifications, by just sucking at it really bad until I stop sucking. And some of that is through internet tutorials, some of that is through reading books on different sewing techniques, and so a lot of it is actually being very nervous in masquerade queues and just talking to everyone around me. Like, how did you make this thing? It looks so nice, it's so beautiful, what is it? And I'm just talking to people, because anyone who's ever made something that was really hard wants to talk about it. So I did flick through this panel the other day, but I don't know what's next, so here we go. Right. My first thing when it comes to upping your sewing game is do not be afraid to hand sew things. I remember when I first got a sewing machine and I was like, you know what? Everything on the sewing machine. Like this, it'd be like easy to do this on by hand. Do you know there's a thing that allows you to sew buttons with a machine that takes 5 hours to set up right and falls off like anything? So hand sewing is actually one of the ways to get your sewing to the next level. And the two stitches which are the most useful is your back stitch, just there's a diagram, and running stitch. So those are just starting stitches to get you started. And really useful ones that are specifically used in tailoring are something called pick stitch and ladder stitch. Now pick stitch, these are two coats that I've made in the past 2 years, so they probably suck less than ones that I made before then. You know, just be like, oh, look at it, it's falling apart. Pick stitch is when you see the inside of a jacket, there's sometimes little lines of dots there. Oh, it doesn't have it. Damn it. When a coat is made classically, the coat is made completely unlined, and then the lining is made as a separate item, which is commonly called bagged lining. And then what you do is you actually just hand sew the entire thing inside. That's how they get it so crisp. What they do is they create the entire thing, fold up all of the hems and the edges and put in these sort of facings, and so you've got that item ready to go. And then when it's all nice and crisp, then the lining goes in to just cover up the horrific mess of the inside. And the way to do that is by just running pick stitch, which is that one there, which is an almost invisible back stitch, and it is very, very useful. The other one that's really useful is a ladder stitch. Now, has anyone here ever made a plushie toy or anything like that? You know, when you sort of stuff it and then you're like, how do I close the hole up at the end? Ladder stitch is the way to do it. It's called ladder stitch because it looks like a little ladder, and it's basically the opposite of a running stitch. You stitch along and then pull it together and it will pull it and create an invisible seam, and that is so useful. So these two tools are fantastic for your arsenal in the fight against sewing things. So I do not really like commercial patterns, mainly because I consider myself a size small, and I was teaching someone how to sew recently, and they were just like, oh, I've got this coat pattern that we can use. I was like, okay, what's the size small? And the size small is 44 inches chest. to give you an idea, my chest measures 36. That is what they consider a size small to be. And for people who are on the larger side of things, the size extra large is horrific too. And what tends to happen is they will do it as a size medium and then just scale it up. Just be like, oh, it's fine, it's like bras. Bras are all designed at 34B, and then they just enlarge it from there, and it's no wonder like people who are larger chested can't find things that fit them. I see some nods around the room like, yeah, reading it, yeah. So, patterns are good though. The instructions can be a bit tricky, but they're a good starting point. So for example, for this coat here, that is the commercial pattern that I used for it. What I did was I used white fabric, marked out all of the pattern, used it to what my approximate size should be, but then after putting it together and deciding how I wanted the back to look and everything like that, this is the pattern that I came up with in the end. You can see how much has been taken away to get the curve there. And I will show you. That's a picture of what the pattern looks like. Look, it's just a sack, isn't it? It's just an awful sack. Can you imagine if, okay, this coat is a character called Moist von Litvig from the world of Cherry Pratchett. Thank you, Pratchett represents. And the suit's supposed to be gold. And I spent about 2 years being like, I want to make a gold suit and not finding a fabric that I didn't hate. And in the end, I found this in like a curtain shop. And it cost 30 quid a metre. So I ordered 3 meters, like, this is how much this coat has to take. Like, I have 3 meters and I need to make a coat and some trousers from this, and that is exactly how much I will use. So it meant that I needed a mock-up pattern because no one wants to waste that much money, because that's 90 quid. That's... I haven't got a comparison, but that's, I don't know, that's like several animes. There you go, that's the currency of kids nowadays, right? I don't know, it's all on Blu-ray now, so it's getting even more expensive, like, just sit on my old man tower. Make a mock-up of the thing that you're going to make out of scrap fabric. Old bed sheets are really good for this kind of thing. And then what you do is just take it in, adjust, sew in a new panel to make bits bigger until you get a pattern that does what you want to do. Because even if you use paper patterns, nothing moves like cloth. Cloth is both rigid and flexible at the same time. It is hard to work with, but that's what makes it so great when you nail it. So here is... You can see what I've done is severely taken the jacket in. One thing I did was I put one of my jackets onto, I've got like a dress form, but she's got boobs, so it's a bit tricky, and she doesn't have enough shoulder. So I put one of my jackets over the top to give me something to lay on. Taking in things like that is always easier with another person who can pin the back for you, and you can hold it where you stand. As a little recommendation, make sure your arms are in the right place, like when you're pinning something together, especially if you've got something with a fitted tight sleeve. If you pin the pattern together like that, that's how your arms are going to stay. And you can see how I've basically slowly adjusted this mock-up pattern until I got, if I go back, you can see in that far. Is that left or right for me or you? I'm just going to far one. That far one, you see the pattern I cut out, and that far one again, that's the pattern I actually used to make that in the end. Yeah, so you see the amount of difference, and I would have wasted so much fabric if I'd just gone ahead that way. This isn't just a picture of my bum. This is another mock-up of the trousers for this suit, because when you're trying to make something fit, bigger is always better. So I made a mock-up with the trousers that fit, and then when I went to sew it, I added a little bit extra seam allowance just to give me a bit more room, which was useful, especially because when I went to make the trousers, they were this like baggy piece of shit. Like, I mean, they're trousers, sure, but they could have been better. So, but imagine if those were too tight. and then I'm just like, what do I do now? Like, yeah, I'm gonna add a strip down the side. There's lots of things you can do, but it's always easier to take in than take out. So that is them when they're actually taken in, and you can see it's a much better fit, much better length. Yeah, so make it a little bit too big, take it in, it's always much easier. Also, if you're anything like me, in the past 3 months I've gained a stone, and basically none of my clothes fit anymore, so I might be able to take those trousers out and still wear them. I haven't put this on in like a couple of months. Let's see how we do. 1 second. Oh, it's alright, but I can't actually raise my arms above that level. Yeah. Oh, that's really sad. Yeah, I can't actually. But it looks so nice at the back. Yeah. Thank you everyone. I'm just gonna get out. Oh. Nice. It'll look nice on the chair instead of me instead. Yeah, like what I'm saying, when I first made that suit, the back was all baggy and it looked wrong. And in the end, what I had to do was rip the sleeves off, start again, bring it in, make it fit. You can see it's much better there. A little bit creased, but that's what ironing is for. Right. Now, the insides of suits is what helps make them what they are. Suits are strangely like padded armour, because you're trying to make yourself look as sort of pointy as possible. This sort of thing obviously works for other stuff, not just sort of like suits, but it's about shoulder pads or like adding sort of puffy sleeves and things like that. Same stuff applies. This is, people familiar with what interfacing is? Yeah, we've got some nods. For people who don't know, interfacing is basically a support fabric. This can be like a non-woven thing you get in rolls, you can buy in pretty much every fabric shop. I like the iron-on stuff because I'm lazy, and it just, it makes a lot of really tricky fabrics a lot easier to work with. Like for example, if you've got a costume that's actually a stretch fabric, but you need to make some cuffs and you want the cuffs to look nice, iron some interfacing to that. It makes it a non-stretch fabric, and then you can use it like a normal fabric. And that just makes everything so much easier. And so when you're making, say, a jacket, for example, you want to interface the entire front section just to make it that sort of like beautiful sturdiness that comes from it being a suit. The other points that are really important to have around your cuffs, because that's where what interfacing does is when you iron it, it helps it fold over better. So you want it all along the hem of the suit, all around the cuffs. This little diagram shows where all of the support fabric would be in like a standard tailored jacket. You see there's especially some around the collar, and also around anywhere that pockets or intricate bits would be. Just having that extra little bit of support stops the fabric from wrinkling. Another one is you can add interfacing on the back of very thin fabric. So for example, I couldn't find, this is actually for Doctor Who coat, you know, the one with all of the different panels on it, and I couldn't find anything for that yellow lapel anywhere. So in the end I ended up dyeing this weird stretch wool with like yellow washing machine dye. But it was slightly see-through, so what I did was I backed it onto some white linen. You can do that with, there's this beautiful spray glue, which you can see in that bottom there, which temporarily fixes fabric to each other. People use it for quilting. You can buy it, I bought my can off eBay, but a lot of the fabric shops that do quilting stuff will have it available. It's really useful stuff, because the inside of this coat, so, you know, I talked about like I only had 3 meters of this fabric. I was like, it's stripy, what can I do with this? I know, I'm going to put everything on the bias, that's what I'm going to do. For people not familiar with what that is, when fabric is woven together, you have the warp and the weft of the different threads going that way on woven fabrics. The bias is the diagonal. What it means is if you pull that way, no stretch. If you pull that way, no stretch. But if you pull on the diagonal, it's got a bit of stretch to it because it's like the diamonds doing this. And that's how bias binding works, and when you sort of make your own. But it means like if you're going to do that down the back of a jacket like this one, it would look like a wrinkly piece of shit, basically, if you just sewed it like that. So what I did was some linen, I had black, whatever, that's what I had knocking about, so that's what was inside of it. I recommend going for a colour that does match, though. Do as I say, not as I do. And I basically sprayed it to the back of all of the pieces that I cut out, so the fabric had that extra bit of support, so it meant that it was solid and wouldn't wrinkle. What's happening now? Yeah, so that's what the inside of that jacket looks like. It's kind of ugly, like, because I'm sewing with the white, but you can really see here, you can see all of the interfacing panels that I've put down the sides to stop it stretching. And you can also see the mock-up sleeves that I've done. One of the tips I'd say for constructing jackets when it comes to the sleeve pattern, until you made the body, don't even bother. Because the body can be so different with how the pattern is that if you had the sleeve pattern originally, by the time you've adjusted it to fit you, that sleeve might not fit anymore. So the best thing to do is make the body of it, and then the sleeves come after. It's very important to save enough fabric so you can do the sleeves though. So make sure you've got enough of a square left over. Because the other one is, sleeves are much wider than you think they're going to be. Yeah, everyone's like, yeah. It's something to do with, so if you think of that as like the circumference of the circle makes something that long. It's crazy, isn't it? Like, getting your head around shapes is difficult. Anyway. Right. I've got a beautiful tailoring techniques book that costs a lot of money and it is fantastic. And what I did once, well, for this suit and for a Doctor Who coat that I made on a commission, I was like, right, I'm going to do all of the proper tailoring things. I'm going to follow everything they do. And one of the things that they recommend doing is hand rolling a lapel. Is anyone familiar with this as a thing? Basically, to make the collar sit right over, what you do is gently fold it over and then pick stitch. You see all those lines? That's just little lines of pick, just holding it so it rolls nicely. In my opinion, it don't do shit and don't even bother with it. However, one of the secret techniques that I got from this book is amazing. And it's how to turn corners. Now this is a corner of one of the Doctor Who coats, so it's a point on a coat like this point here. And getting that to turn so it looks nice is difficult, because that's like, I don't know, it's that crisp edge that people see and you want it to be nice. You want it to be nice. This also works really well on, you see these wee little points here? Yeah. Sorry, I really like sewing. Has anyone realised that? What you do is you get a little bit of bias tape, and you just sort of hand stitch it just inside the sewing line. So here's where I've sewn on the machine, and then this is just hand stitched to the interfacing so it doesn't go through to the fabric. Then what you do is you gather the corner with a running stitch, iron it down until it looks like that, okay? Like normally if you turn something out there, one of the main tips is just clip the corner, just so you don't have that bulk of extra fabric when you turn it the other way out. You familiar with that technique? Yeah, okay, nods, good, we're all on the same page. I don't like doing that. That has always felt dangerous for me. Because you're just like, oh, but what if it just frays? This is how you get around that. So what you do is do a running stitch, gather that corner up, fold it in and down, and then when you turn it inside out, it makes a corner like that. You're like, yeah, getting hot in here. So sew all your clothes. Yeah, so that is one that I definitely recommend giving a go. It's great for collars, like cuffs, everything like that, especially for fabrics that are just being annoying, and some fabrics just don't iron down as flat as other ones, and it's a way to just make things pop. Yeah, that's the other side of that. It's nice, isn't it? And don't forget facing in jackets. Facing is... You see all inside here, you have a bit of the same thick fabric on the inside. That makes this collar work. That makes the turn of this work. If this was just lining, what you probably get is a bit of the bagged lining just pushing over the edge, you know what I mean? So facing is really useful. It's also really useful, say if you're doing a dress and it's got like a round collar, and you're like, how do I make this a collar? How do I hem this? And what you do is you actually get a circle of the same fabric, stitch along, and just fold the circle in on itself, as opposed to trying to just do a turning roll hem, which on like the inside of a circle never goes well. It's like doing, just about like doing like a turned roll hem on like a wide circle, and all you get is like wrinkly bits of thing. One of the best ways actually to hem the bottom of dresses is to sew like bias tape in the same colour along the bottom of the hem where you want it, and then press and fold that up, because that creates like a beautiful crisp edge, as opposed to you just trying to make too much fabric fold over in itself and having wrinkles all over the place. I don't know what, and that's about facing. It's a picture of what the inside of a like coat collar is. Shoulder pads are not just for the 80s, they're actually really useful. I see you glaring at each other like, no, we told you. Shoulder pads, especially in like suits and things like that, just make it not fold in on itself, because I've got a dent in here where my shoulder is and everything like that. And they are just really useful. The most useful part of a shoulder pad is, we all know about like this big old like pad bit here. A lot of high-class suits have a second pad just inside the nape of the sleeve. Let me see. This is called like the rope of a sleeve. So there's a shoulder pad in here. There's also a little one just in here, just to make it roll over nicely. So I think I've got, that's a shoulder pad. I tend to just make my shoulder pads out of things of wadding, like especially for suits. I tend to just make them to fit, as opposed to, you know, the like cheap nasty ones you get in like shops. But the little inner shoulder pad, like that, just gets sewn into the top of the sleeve there, and it just adds a little bit. Like for example, on your puffy sleeves, you could put a little bit of puff there that makes it all like come out. Yeah, I'll put it back on the thing. So fancy, yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay, sewing in sleeves. The answer is, you think you've got enough pins? It's time for some more pins, yeah. Because actually, the more pins there are, the easier it is to sew around. If you ever, you know, pattern instructions a bit like, to sew a suit, what you do is run 2 lines of thread on a low tension, pull it in together, and then apply it to the sleeve, and then sew round. It just makes wrinkly awfulness. It just doesn't work. What I tend to do is I pin the bottom of the sleeve. So I'll just rip this one like this. Does that work? Who knows? So I'll pin, that's my sleeve there. I will pin all of the sleeve there. And then what I'll do is I'll take the sleeve, find the middle of it, put that in the middle, find the middle of those bits, put it in the middle, and then just keep going infinitum until it's all in the sleeve. And if you're really lucky, it won't be very wrinkly. Really lucky. And you'll sew it and you'll find a wrinkle somewhere, and all you do is you unpick that bit, pin it down a lot, sew it again, and it'll be fine. What the hell? Like, yeah, so don't be afraid on sleeves to unpick little sections. Before you unpick, put it on your body to make sure the sleeve is in the right place. That's a good tip as well. And if it really, just more pins and it'll be fine. Like it does, I really don't like medical needles, but for some reason I just accept the fact I'm going to get stabbed whenever I sew. Like I'm just like, no, it's fine. You know, like,
it's a difference, isn't it? Because you're poking yourself, whereas it's them.
No, true, yeah, it's about power. But then it's always by accident or something. Yeah. So, I mean, the worst thing I've ever sewn is like trims for hats. So if you trim a hat, you put a pin in and it just becomes this death pinwheel like this, and you just put it through the sewing machine like, blood will be spilt this night. So like that's the mark of a, you know a costume's finished when you've bled for it, right? Apparently, pro tip, I haven't tried this one, but I hear this works, especially if you're working with white fabrics. If you bleed on your costume, the best way to get that drop of blood off is you grab a bit of thread which is the same colour, chew it in your mouth and just put it on. The enzymes in your spit will lift the blood out for you. Yeah. That's what you do straight away. Apparently, wedding shops swear by this because they bleed on those things all the time.
I'll kill people and get away with it.
No, under a UV light they'll still be able to know because it's got spit on it too. Yeah. And my other tip is just iron the damn thing. And by iron the damn thing, I don't mean iron the creases out. I mean, so for example, like this. Oh, it's this coat is Queenie from Fantastic Beasts. Yeah, I'll be wearing it tomorrow and trying not to melt. It's got in some of the designs there's a triangle sort of like thing there, and I was like, I'm gonna do it. It'll look nice. So what I did is at every moment of sewing this thing in, I sewed, then took it off the machine, over to the ironing board, pressed it open at every single step, and like the results show for themselves about how well it comes together. And it's the same for whenever you do a back seam. Like I find the back seam most satisfying part of sewing a jacket because once you've ironed that out, it looks nice, looks real nice. So basically, it's anyone that I've ever taught to sew, because I have a rule, which I have learned after many years, is that I do not make my friends' costumes. They come over to my house and they learn how to make them themselves, and that has saved me many, many arguments over the years, especially when people who don't know how to sew make something and they're super proud of it. Like, for example, this is Christian. Learning to make his own Doctor Who coat, and he was so damn proud, and we were both so proud of each other. It was great. Real bonding time. And the biggest thing I was surprised about is that there's not actually that much sewing involved. There's just a lot of ironing. Like, I mean, you cut it out. Cutting out takes ages. Like, always takes ages. You're just like, oh, I just got to cut out, it'll be fine. 7 hours later. So, cutting out takes ages. Ironing all of the interfacing on all the bits that you have to iron onto takes ages. Sewing, barely any time at all. Unpicking the thing, ages. Like, re-sewing the bit that you've mucked up, no time at all. Like, unless you're making like a massive ball gown or something, and that's just like, I will sew forever now. This is my tomb. But yeah, I think one of the biggest tips for pushing your sewing skills up, it's just ironing every seam, and I know it sounds arduous, but sorry kids. Right? Yeah. See, proof, yeah. And finish edges where you can. Like that's the inside of the trousers. I've just put some bias on the edge. I don't own a serger because I don't like them, they're finicky. I mean, does anyone own a serger in this room? Yeah? Threading them takes forever, and I just didn't use it often enough, and I was like, nah. Like, anyone want to, opinions on owning a serger?
Once you learn how to thread it.
Satan?
Once you learn, you got this one, I can number mine. This one, this one has first, that one has the second, third one. When you learn that, you go,
for me, I think it was the tension went out on one, and I could just never correct it. Like, it started out, I sort of thought it to be able to sew, like, stretch stuff together, and then it started doing a weird thing that when you pulled on the fabric, it just made loops there, and I just couldn't find anything to fix it. This is a time when I say, like, it's quite important to get your sewing machines, like, serviced. Yeah, like my embroidery machine, I've had it 3 years and not serviced it once, and it's just like a sad old little lady, like, why? I mean, embroidery machines are definitely more expensive, but for about £100 you can make a sewing machine feel like brand new again, and they make sure that your machine is all right. My machine, last time I took it in to be serviced, the dude was like, if you keep using it like this, it'll be dead in 6 months. And I was like, well, it lasted me 8 years, so like, when it dies, and I'm still using it, it's awful. Like, the feed dogs barely even work anymore. I'm just like, pull it through. When Christian came around my house to learn how to sew, he also did some sewing at home with his mother-in-law's sewing machine, and he was like, "Her machine is so much better than yours, I'm sorry to say." I'm just like, "Oh, I know." Like, it just shows, ain't the tools, it's how you use them. Yeah. So, finishing edges, like going back to this point, is really important, mainly because it makes your costume last a lot longer. Sometimes when I open up my old costumes and look inside, I'm just like, see, I didn't believe in seam allowance. And it's just fraying away, and you know, that's how you get ripped ass seams. That's what it leads to, that's what happens, yeah? And there's a lot of tension in that seam, yeah? Has to survive a lot. So, finishing edges either with like a zigzag, or binding the edges, or serging them, or just doing something so they don't fray, just makes it last so much better. And also doesn't like tickle you, like inside that you're just, or when you go to put your foot in a costume and your like toe catches on a bit of thread and it all just goes, and you're like, oh no, I needed that to cover my dignity. And the other thing is just bloody line it. Like, that's the inside of the Doctor Who coat. This is using like bag lining. I want to share my like favourite way to line a jacket. What I tend to do is I do the torso first. So just all of the torso here, all of that, leaving the sleeves unattached, and then I'll sort out like all of the business that's going on with the hem. And what I'll do is, I will open it up inside out, and then I'll normally zigzag it all around to this seam here. Because what I find that does is it means, I find if you put it in with the sleeves, the middle of it around the back tends to go over time. That's a very accurate explanation. So I feel securing it to the inside of the sleeves actually just makes it more durable. On the inside of professional coats, they tend to have like a strip of fabric holding the lining to the sleeve at that point, but I like that extra bit of security. And then what I do is I tend to sew the sleeves at that end, tuck the lining back in through, and then what I'll do is, using that pick stitch, I will just fold the top of the sleeve back over, and then just sew it in that way. And that's how I tend to line like all of my suits. The way they do it professionally is they leave like a tiny gap that they can. The problem with like sewing a jacket lining in is that you can't just sew the two sleeves together and all around the bottom. Because if you ever try turning it inside out, it's like a Mobius strip. It is like, you'll just keep turning it inside out forever. Like, you've made an object that is impossible to turn inside out. I've still not figured that one out yet. So that's why I just add the sleeves later. There we go. So that's how I tend to line things. Oh, that's my magic wand. Excuse me. Oh, and there's a picture of sewing the top of the sleeve into there by hand. Yeah, there we go.
Needs more pins.
Unfortunately, when it comes to things that actually work, turning hems up by hand tends to be the best way, except for maybe the sewing bias binding and then turning up that I said earlier. Sorry, it's annoying. I don't like doing it, but the results speak for themselves. Like the hem on this one, I'm just going to take the wand out before I hurt someone. All of the hem is turned up like that, and before, like when it was pinned, you know, because it's such thick fabric, when I put it on, it kind of made this weird like triangle thing, like, because the hem just wasn't falling right. Going along and just hand stitching that into place really just makes it a bit more flexible and smooth. But what you can do if the hem isn't sort of too large is use hem tape. You familiar with this? It's basically like a roll of like fibrous tape that when you heat it under an iron, it glues things in place. And it's really useful you can just do hem tape all along a hem like this, iron it, and that will keep it down flat, and that's a nice way of doing things. It's also really useful this is adding bias binding to the edge of pockets without wanting to do the entire bias binding rigmarole. So what I did for that as a way to basically make iron-on bias binding is hem tape along it, wax paper, iron on top, and then you get like a pre-glued strip of bias binding. And then you can fold that over onto the edge, just iron it down and be like, yes. And then if you're worried about it being insecure later, you can then just run a stitch along the edge, and then you get like this perfect bound edge with none of the sew, flip it over, sew on top business, which is the absolute joy of bias binding. Yeah, anyone, bias binding always takes twice as long as I think it's gonna every single time. Yeah, I've done many. The worst one I ever did was I made a set of 4 Full Metal Alchemist uniforms for some people, and I was just like, oh my god. It was one of my first Kitacons actually, and what happened was I woke up Thursday morning at 8 AM, started sewing, and I kept sewing until our coach on Friday, 8 AM morning. Yeah. So, bias binding always takes far longer than you think it's going to. Yeah. I didn't know night before costumes before this event actually. It kind of scared me a little bit. Like, I'm so used to doing it. Anyway, great. Alright, because I'm coming to the end, that's one of my final tips, which is give yourself enough time to do the thing. The amount of time you think it's going to take, double it, always. My other main tips are pretty much everything can be unpicked except welted pockets, which can't because they're the worst. By welted pocket, I mean this kind of pocket. It's so nice, but such danger. This is my second attempt. I fortunately had enough fabric to do it, but my first one I wasn't happy with, and I had to just redo the entire thing. Because what you're going to do, because it was all puckered sort of next to the side. There are tons of tutorials about like welted pockets and things like that out there, but I've got some pictures of like how this one was done. Because, there we go. There you can see what I tried. You see it's kind of wrinkly, sort of all around the edges. Like, it's alright, but you're just like, oh, but I could do it better. And then I'm just like, I'll try it. So I figured if I do it separate and just sort of gave it a go, if the next one was worse, oh well, I tried. So what I did was cut out the shape I wanted in interfacing to get the shape and the sort of crispness. Then basically folded that over, sewed it to the lining itself until you basically made like a rectangle of the fabric attached to a bit of pocket lining. And then you open up the bottom of it, then sew that down onto the back of the coat. So you can see there's 2 lines with a little strip in the middle, and with a little hole cut through. That's the dangerous part, the cutting the hole through. And then you add a pocket onto the back, and it all turns through like that, like magic. It's beautiful. If anyone wants any welted seam tutorials, grab a card from me at the end. I've got like a couple I've used in the past. It's when you want to add like, it's called a welted pocket. One sec. Your normal one you get is like that kind of pocket on a jacket. If you want to learn how to do that, hit me up. I know like a couple of tutorials which explain it a bit better than I have there. Right, Oh, there we go, like, give yourself time, as I've already said. So my last tips, make the experience enjoyable. Put on a podcast, play some music, have some friends over to sew with you. Don't make it that you are fighting the sewing gods alone, because it's hard, and if you make it feel like work, it will be work. Personally, I genuinely enjoy the making things, because it's like solving a big puzzle for me. And if you can make yourself enjoy the doing of the thing, as opposed to idealizing the final product, you'll find that you actually do the thing a bit more. Like everyone struggles with procrastination, but if you make it something you actually want to do, it just makes it a bit easier. Like, don't make yourself suffer, like, oh, I have to do this, it's for a convention, I promised my friends I'll do all of this thing, I need to do it, I must do it. Those are the worst words. The I want to make this costume isn't a good attitude to go in with. And if it goes wrong, you can go back, always. Another one that I try and live by is no costume is perfect, but your next one will be even better. Because of all the things you learn along this journey. I don't know, I am like an awful perfectionist when it comes to these things, and I know all the things that are wrong with this coat, because you know, you've made it with your hands, it's, yeah. And people can come up to you and be like, oh, that's the most beautiful costume you've seen, and you'll be like, thanks, but this is all wrong with it. Try not to do it next time. Like, just be like, just thank you and swoop out, yeah. And basically, what this panel is about, really, is don't be afraid when it comes to making your own costumes, about making the inside as beautiful as the outside, because that is what tailoring is kind of about, really. It's about making something that is structurally sound, like lined on the insides, and it just makes a costume that you put so much love into, because we do put so much love into them, it just makes them all that much better. Right, thank you very much for listening to my panel about the sewing, so I really appreciate that. Any questions, like, before people head off? Yes, go for it.
What do you look at, like, for fabrics used for, like, your suits? Like, do you always go for a particular, like, brand? Because I have a problem of, wow, there's actual fabric that's called suiting, but it doesn't do what a suit fabric does.
I get what you mean. Yeah. I mean, I do find that suiting is generally easier to work with than, say, like, this is curtain fabric, and just, like, this is also curtain fabric. Like, it was a curtain, it was literally a door curtain, and the coat was going to be as big as the curtain was. Like.
The problem I've got at the moment, the fabric I've got, it was £1 a metre, and it's very, like, flimsy, so I've backed it, but now it's too heavy.
Okay, yeah, so you just, how much of the fabric you got? Because sometimes,
meters, because it was £1 a metre.
yeah, no, can you just double it?
Yeah.
Is that what you did, or sorry, did I?
No, I doubled it with another fabric, so it's like, it's still like,
Yeah. Sometimes that is just learning about which ones work for something, but no, I do find general advice for shopping for fabrics, in most fabric store sections, they have a bit that just says suiting, and the thing is, suiting just means a woven fabric that someone might use for a suit, so what's in it varies a lot. One good thing is to check the stretch of the fabric while you're looking, and like your problem, hold it up to the light. See how much see-through you've got, especially white fabrics. But even, I bought a suit from Topman, I was like, oh, this is white, this is cool. Oh, in the changing room I can see my pants through it. But fine, I'll just buy like a beige pair and we'll be like ready to go. Put on a beige pair, and I'm just like, you can see the lining of the pockets through it. So I've already bought this, and I'm just looking at these. So it's just got this weird pockets like here, and I'm just like, oh, that's doesn't look good. So any else have like tips for when you're fabric shopping? What do you look for in a fabric? So I know because we're making costume replicas, it's really difficult because we're often just looking for a colour. And the problem is, oh, you had a point for that,
I
yeah?
was going to say, don't be afraid to be that person who unrolls like a couple of meters of a fabric as long as you put it back again.
Yes,
You
yeah.
need to see how it drains as well.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, get the feel for it. I mean, one of my favourite fabrics that you don't see use that very much is, oh no. Crepe. Crepe. Oh, we got some looks of disgust, haven't we? Yeah. Crepe is, depends what crepe. When you look at a traditional Japanese kimono, that is made of silk crepe. And what it is a matte, extremely flexible fabric that drapes very well. And it's silk, so you can dye it. So, So, like silk crepe is a fantastic fabric for cosplay because you can dye it to whatever colour you want, and it just flows beautifully. And I find even polyester crepe, which you can dye with acrylic inks, is a way to find a weird fabric colour and then use it that way. I mean, yeah, so that's good about the pulling out the fabric things. Any other sort of tips for fabric shopping that people use? Yes?
If your fabric is flimsy, double up on it, or
Yep.
don't buy flimsy fabric. It's
Yeah.
gonna rip.
Yeah,
Well,
sure,
it's
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
rip apart, so.
Yeah.
It's worth asking the shop assistants as well.
Yes.
Pretty much, if they're working in the fabric shop, they know fabric inside out,
Yeah.
and most of them make their own things. So
Yes, totally.
if you go like, well, I'm making a coat, they're like, well, you want this sort of weight, you want this sort of length, you want this sort of things, and here's the accessories that you'll need to make it, and then they do know their stuff.
Yeah. And it's okay if you don't know fancy fabric names at all. Like, some fabrics have really specific odd names, but at the end of the day, it's just using words to try and describe what you're trying to get to. So, I mean, like, I have no idea, like, I call this curtain fabric. It's probably not called that at all. Like, so, yeah, who knows? Yeah. Any other questions or points people wanted to bring back up? Yeah?
Texture and weight are massive things. If you're anything like me, there are certain fabrics which, if they're against your skin, you just like, get it off, get it off, get it
True.
off.
Oh, that's a good one. Itch test. Like, rub it against. Is it gold lame? Will it basically burn your skin asunder? Yes. Yeah, do not buy. Yeah.
Or get something for a lining that you can have in it.
And that is a good one that, like, especially if you use sequin fabric at all, and sequin fabric is the devil. Like, sequin dresses, get ready to lose your armpits, because that's what's going to happen. I tried on, Zara did a line of sequin, like, jackets, just sort of like suits, and I was like, oh yeah, and I put it on, and the sequins hit the back of my neck, and I was like, yeah, so touching it, like, give it a feel, like, pour through it, because the problem occurs when you buy it online, isn't it? Yeah. And a lot of places do offer sample services. Sometimes you just got to take a risk. You just got to take a risk and see how it goes. Yeah. Any other questions or points? Yes.
How do you line or what, a pen, like a star shape, like 4-point star sort of thing, so like a cut out on the back of a suit jacket?
Yeah, no, I know this. This is a fantastic trick, and I actually learnt it when we picked apart someone's Naruto jacket, okay? What you do is you get 2 bits of the fabric, do a star, sew all the way around it, right? This is one technique. There are other ones, but this is my favourite one. So, all the way around it, and you cut a hole in the back and pull it all through, and it makes a perfect star, which you can then sew onto the back of like a jacket that way. It's called, I call it 3D applique, is the way I describe it. So you're basically creating like the object to go on. Yeah.
What if it's a cut out on the jacket though?
Oh,
So it's
what
a
if
gap.
it's? Oh, so if it's underneath.
So no, there's a jacket, well, I think the jacket's literally got a star cut
Oh,
out
yeah,
in
yeah.
the middle.
Well,
So you've
you
got
do
a
the reverse thing. So you do a facing. So you make 2 at the back, pop it on like that, interface the hell out of it because you want it to be stiff on those sort of like points that are sticking up. Do like the star on the back, and then then cut it out, and then turn it inside itself. Does that make any sense? Like, yeah. So it's literally that. Yeah, you can do it on sort of like, so if you have like 2 bits of fabric like that, you sew a circle around, cut the circle out, fold it inside itself, it will make 2 sheets of fabric sewn together with a hole in the middle. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Like, I hope that explained it. Yeah, try experimenting at small size. Like, get 2 bits of fabric, do a star, cut the star out the middle, flip it inside out, see how well that works for you before you do it on the expensive, beautiful jacket that you've half made. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
A problem I have with, this happens in 2 things. One is whenever I do a facing on the collar, the lapels, like when I turn it right around, the lapels kind of bunch a bit, and it's difficult to get that crispy even if it is an interface. And another problem that I had, I was making a regular jacket, and there are darts the sides of them, and there was puckering that happened when I did it right around with the lining. I do it kind of puckered, and I had to unstitch it and restitch by hand, which didn't, lightly tap it by hand, because stitching it by hand caused it to pucker and bunch up a little bit. Do you have any tips of how to kind of counter that?
Counter puckering, really sharp needles, especially if you're doing anything with satin. Really fine weight sharp needles mean that you get less puckering in general. Another one is making sure when you have a dart, that the points of the dart, you have directions of fabric, so that warp and weft thing again. Make sure that the middle of the dart is on that warp and weft, so the fabric when it meets will be the same sort of movement. That's one of my sort of tips for like darting. When it comes to your thing about lapels, do you remember the thing I showed about the running stitch, fold over, iron, things like that? That might help you a bit more. The other thing I find that's quite good is I tend to, when I'm just sort of making edges and things like that, are you familiar with pinking shears at all? So the shears that they cut zigzags as they go along. Sometimes what I'll do is after I've sewn something, I will do pinking shears all on the inside, so when I flip, there's just so much less fabric to deal with there, especially on this point of a lapel. That's like a good point for it to be. I hope that helps a little bit. Like, yeah. Any other questions or points here? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. I hope you have a lovely con. Cheers.